Before YouTube, I used to be an office worker. The office itself was inside a beautiful, old but renovated building in the center of Prague. The facilities were modern and I had access to amenities such as free coffee, a relaxation area, table football, and even a console corner. The team was great, a very informal, friendly, laid-back group of mostly foreigners. The salary was great, higher than the national average due to an added premium for my language skills. I was doing business-level IT support stuff, but if something was wrong with a system for a client, I had to go fix it for them or walk them through how they can do it themselves. The work itself was okay. Not too difficult, not too monotone, you had to use your head and your language skills a lot. It really felt like I had everything when it came to my workplace. The ultimate job where I would be set for life. And yet, after a year or so, I was miserable, depressed. I was dragging myself to work every morning and counting down the hours until I was free. Over time, my work became this excruciating waiting room I had to waste my time in for 8 hours a day so I could get the money so I could do what I actually wanted on my scant few holidays. When I wasn't at work during weekends or on a vacation, I had little rest. My work loomed over me like the sword of Damocles, getting closer every day, and then, before I knew it, I was back in the hamster wheel, waiting for the next day off to come. I kept thinking about this whole situation. What is wrong with me? Am I just lazy? Am I going to end up as some loser, flunking from workplace to workplace till retirement? But then, something interesting happened. I was invited to friends in the deep Czech countryside. We spent a few days in a centuries-old farmhouse, that typical one with the inner courtyard and multiple parts to live in. It was winter, and the only means of heating was an old wood-fired ceramic furnace, sort of like this one. My friends had to leave for a few hours, and I was left alone. Outside was like -10°C, and it was getting cold inside too. The fire was out. I wanted to restart it, but there was no firewood, so I went out to the courtyard. There was no firewood either, but there were some stumps that my friends had cut from logs with a chainsaw, so I took an axe and cut up some stumps for firewood. After half an hour, I had a whole pile of firewood. I brought some inside, and after some trial and error, I'd managed to start the fire inside the furnace. When that fire started burning, I just kept staring at it. I could not take my eyes off it, and the heat it started to give off felt strangely pleasant. I mean, of course, warmth is pleasant in a cold room, but this was something else, something much stronger. And then, when my friends came back and thanked me for making the fire, and when I saw them sitting around the furnace that I heated up, I was in a state of euphoria. But why? Why did this simple act give me so much fulfillment while my office job didn't? At work, I was doing far more important things than just cutting up some wood and starting a fire. And yet, the office was depressing, while starting that stupid little fire gave me an uncanny amount of joy. So clearly, I was capable of finding happiness in work. I wasn't a lost cause after all. The second half of my revelation came when I bought a small apartment on a mortgage, putting my savings into a down payment. Not in Prague, of course, I wish. The apartment was in a very bad state and needed full renovation, which I did by myself. I took a week off and spent most of it in the apartment doing the renovation. Once I started, I literally could not stop. I just kept working, forgetting to eat even. I got hypoglycemia multiple times. That's when your blood sugar gets so low that your hands and feet start to shake. At that point I would stop and eat, but then I was right back at what I was doing. I worked till midnight until I was so physically exhausted I had to sleep. But then my eyes sprung open at 6 AM on their own, no alarm needed. And after a quick breakfast, I went right back into work once more. 18 hours of hard work every day, and I was loving every second of it. I wasn't even tired. In fact, I was more energetic than ever before. So clearly, I wasn't lazy at all. That's when I realized what the problem was with my office job, what my problem was with it. It's not that I preferred physical work over intellectual work. I find most physical work repetitive and boring. When my parents ordered firewood for the winter and a mountain of it was plopped down on our driveway and I had to haul all that inside, I hated every goddamn second of it. No, the real difference between my office job and me cutting wood to make a fire or renovating an apartment is that the latter two had meaning to me. I was working towards something I cared about, and in the furnace example, additionally 4 people I cared about. I was glad to make the fire because I would be warm afterwards, and my friends too, and they would also appreciate the work I did. I was glad to be toiling for 18 hours a day in a dingy apartment because I was working for myself, and I was creating something I could see and relate to afterwards. I could show it off, I could see it, enjoy it, hell, even brag about it. Whatever the case may be, the results of my work would stand there as a monument to the effort I've put into the apartment. By contrast, at my office job, no one really gave a shit about my work. Not my managers, who only looked at the performance graphs for each employee at the end of the month. Not our clients, who were just disembodied voices on the phone or lines of text on a screen who, once the problem was fixed, disappeared without a trace. The boss of the company didn't give a shit either, paying me the same regardless of what I was doing or how I was doing it. I was just showing up every day, climbing into the hamster wheel, spinning it for 8 hours a day, for which, at the end of the month, I would see the number on my bank account go up slightly. And And the worst part was, my position only existed because the company didn't bother to overhaul their badly put together system. Instead of doing that, they just hired 20 more people to sort out the ensuing problems. After a year, I personally knew at least a dozen ways to improve the system, which would have eliminated a double-digit percentage of clients' problems and much of our workload. But if I did submit those suggestions, first, let's face it, my salary would have stayed the same, and second, I would have been at risk of getting fired because by improving the system, I would have made my position unnecessary. Oh, by the way, we were doing like 2 hours of actual work every day and spent the remaining 6 hours secretly procrastinating. But nobody cared because managers gained more funding and influence the more people were on their teams, and the owner couldn't personally check every single level of the company for redundancies or inefficiencies. Just like how a king cannot personally inspect each of his lord's castles to see if they're spending their allowance properly. As a result, a lot of funds will be wasted, and no one will care. The lords don't care because they'll get the money either way as long as things look fine from a distance. And the serfs don't care because it's not their money, not their castle, and not their kingdom, and their compensation will not change anyway. Monarchies are inherently inefficient, corrupt, and wasteful institutions. So why do we let our workplaces operate like them? So how could my office job been more meaningful to me? What could have made me care about the work I was doing? Well, to put it simply, if I had a real stake in the company, if I felt like I was partaking in something I was meaningfully involved in, if I wasn't just some random person showing up to spin someone else's hamster wheel for 8 hours a day, if we, the employees, had a say in how the company was run, if the company was a truly common project where we all share both successes and failures, financial or otherwise. Imagine if workers could vote to allocate part of the extra profit for salary bonuses, earmarking the rest for growing the company. If employees could point out inefficiencies and potential improvements during meetings without the fear of becoming redundant and getting fired. And once things are improved and made more efficient, instead of blanket firing redundant employees as it very often happens, employees could decide what else to do with all these newly freed up resources. During times of crisis, employees could collectively decide to lower their salaries across the board temporarily to give the company budget some breathing room so they won't have to fire anyone. Once the crisis is over, the company will have retained its experienced employees instead of having to do the hiring and training all over again. By the way, when the COVID crisis started, my boss axed an entire department immediately, putting 50 people out on the street. Employees having a say in how the company is run might sound strange or scary, I understand, but think about it. Employees aren't these lowly, brainless serfs there to be guided by the genius of the business owner. Absolutely not. In fact, often it's the employees who are desperately trying to keep things afloat in spite of the tsunami of idiotic ideas from the owner. A great example of this is Elon Musk, who has a group of handlers at Tesla whose sole job is to talk him out of his idiotic ideas before he could do any harm with them. The Tesla Cybertruck is a perfect example, one of Musk's idiotic ideas that managed to slip past the handlers, and it's a complete disaster, what a surprise. The thing is, the bigger a company gets, the harder it becomes for one single person to oversee and control it. Increasingly, it's the employees on the floor, in the trenches, who know what's going on within, who have the new ideas, think of innovations, and experience problems and inefficiencies firsthand. Employees have micro-level insight into the company that the owner will never have. Companies run on their employees, not their bosses. If the boss doesn't come in on Monday morning, business goes on as usual. If the employees don't come in on Monday morning, there is no business. Why then aren't the employees members of the company board, for example? Why is it only financial investors? Investors don't know how the company actually operates, unlike employees. They only see charts and numbers prepared by managers, and they only care about the line going up. If it doesn't go up, oh well, they'll cut their losses and move on to a different company, a different boardroom. Employees, on the other hand, want to see their livelihoods survive. If their workplace goes down, they won't be in a business lounge contemplating where to invest next over a cocktail. They'll be out on the street, scampering to find a new workplace before they and their families become homeless. Investors put money into the company, sure, but money can be printed. Employees, on the other hand, are putting something far more valuable and finite into the company. Their lives. 8 hours of it every single day. Sometimes more. But yeah, I get it. It's not fair. Life's not fair. Monarchies are not fair. You're spending your life as a serf, working for a king, only for that king to make a horrible decision which ruins the kingdom, and by extension, your livelihood. I get that it sucks, I really do, but you can also move to another kingdom, and then hope for the best. Hope that your new king won't be as idiotic. I just don't see an alternative to monarchy. The idea that serfs could run the country is just ludicrous. Look, the king risked a lot to build his country. It's his life's work. It's deeply unfair to suggest that he should not have total control and authority over it. If serfs want to have a say in how the kingdom is run, they could just found their own kingdom. Democracy just just can't work in real life. You need a strong, controlling authority above the masses. Imagine if common people could vote on how their country is run. They would run it into the ground almost immediately. Besides, if we implemented this whole democracy thing, what's stopping people from just voting to empty the treasury and distribute it among themselves? The country would cease to exist. This notion of democratic countries is a myth, a fever dream. People couldn't even control their workplaces democratically, so how could we expect them to control their countries democratically? We need dictators, we need kings. The will of the people cannot be trusted. Not now, not ever. Not at the workplace, and certainly not with the country. It's time to grow up and stop being blind idealists. Democracy is a myth. Dictatorship is the best we will ever get. Time to get used to it. Now get back on your grind set. Oh, wow, it's quite a somber note to end the video on. I had no idea democracy didn't work. It's a shame there aren't any real-life examples of democratic countries on the planet that are far more powerful and influential than any dictatorship. Because if we had those, we could then argue that since people can already run their countries democratically and do it relatively well, they could obviously run their workplaces democratically, since workplaces are a step down from countries, both in terms of complexity and importance. It's like telling a person after they ran a marathon that they could never run a half marathon because it's too difficult. What do you mean? They're running whole marathons. Of course they could do a half marathon. Yeah, right. Democratically controlled workplaces are called worker cooperatives, and generally they're pretty great. They are more resilient to crises, provide more long-term and stable employment, and, importantly, you are no longer just a small, replaceable part in a large machine planted in a mass-produced cubicle in a sea of cubicles. You are part of a team, a collective, working towards the same goal, for your own interests. The largest worker cooperative in the world is currently Mondragon Corporation, employing more than 81,000 people. Worker co-ops are very much viable and seem to be superior to traditionally owned firms in some very relevant ways. So if you're thinking about starting a business, I recommend you look into worker co-ops and start your business like one. And to the question of, if worker co-ops are so great, how come they aren't everywhere? Consider this. Mercantile capitalism, the precursor to our current modern economic system, could have theoretically existed already under the Roman Empire. But it just didn't. It didn't really get started until the 16th century or so. Sometimes good ideas need time to take root, but thankfully we now have the internet allowing those good ideas to spread faster. After we evolved from mercantile capitalism all the way to today's neoliberal capitalism, it's time to take the next step. It's time to graduate to democratic capitalism, also known as Super Capitalism or Capitalism 2.0, a system so much more capitalistic that even workers get to sit on company boards. With that, I'd like to thank you for watching. If you appreciate my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and I'll be seeing you next time.